On a bright morning, the king met with two handsome suitors. Both sought the hand of his daughter, Princess Hinael. Chetaire, the Count of Sal, professed that he had cherished Princess Hinael for as long as he could remember, and humbly asked for the king's blessing to take her as his bride. Meanwhile, Lutz, the imperial prince of Triekas, stated that if he were to choose among the 5 princesses, he too wanted Princess Hinael. The court whispered among themselves about the two men desiring the same princess. The count, known as a hopeless romantic, had been smitten with Her Highness for quite some time. However, after the nation's disastrous attempt to invade the Empire of Triekas, the king had promised one of his daughters as a peace offering, along with war reparations. People wondered whom the king would grant Princess Hinael to, but Princess Hinael already knew her choice because this was her second life. In her first life, Hinael endured a harrowing journey on a snowy night while pregnant, only to find her husband brazenly consorting with his mistress, Isabel. Despite the betrayal, she was grateful for the impending birth of her baby. Suddenly, the carriage door opened, and a knight ordered her and her servant to get out. As they exited, the knight asked the servant to stay behind, while 2 others grabbed Hinael's arms and took her to a cliff. Struggling, she saw a familiar face, and was shocked to see him there. The man approached and grabbed her, revealing that his mistress insisted on taking Hinael's place as his lawful wife. He pushed her closer to the edge. Desperately, Hinael told him she was bearing his child, but he coldly responded that both must go and pushed her off the cliff, happy to be rid of her. Hinael woke up in tears. Her servant, noticing her distress, asked if she had a nightmare, and mentioned that with the Prince of Triekas here to collect the empire's dues, the entire court must be feeling on edge. Hinael asked, "Prince Lutz has come to Sal again?" Her servant, puzzled, replied that this was his first visit, and reminded her that the king had promised the prince one of Sal's princesses as part of the peace terms. Hinael, realizing this was different from her memory, thought to herself, "Did I return to the past?" Later that day, Prince Lutz and his knights entered the kingdom. People gossiped about his cold demeanor and speculated on his future. Noting that he was not the heir to the throne in his country, Hinael knew they were wrong. Soon, the crown prince of Triekas would succumb to an illness, and in the ensuing struggle for the throne, Prince Lutz would triumph. He would rise as the Emperor of Triekas, and the Sal princess given to him would become the empress. Reflecting on her past life, Hinael remembered how she had met her end at the hands of her husband, Lord Chetaire, who had cheated on her and abandoned their child. Determined to change her fate, Hinael asked her servant to bring out all her dresses and jewelry. Her servant, surprised, reminded her that the king wouldn't choose to send her off to Triekas and that her future lay with Lord Chetaire. However, Hinael, resolute in her decision, declared that she would not repeat her previous life. This time, she would not marry Chetaire and would protect herself and her child from any harm. During Hinael's mother's birthday banquet, the queen noticed that Hinael's mind seemed elsewhere. She wished to discuss Chetaire, believing he would make a formal proposal any day now. The queen expressed pride that her daughter had captured the interest of a man who was adored by many noble women and princesses. Hinael recalled feeling the same in her former life, thrilled when Chetaire proposed. But now, knowing what awaited her, she resolved to secure a proposal from Prince Lutz instead. Since his arrival in Sal, Prince Lutz had kept to himself, avoiding social events beyond official gatherings. As Hinael pondered how to approach him, she remembered a significant incident that occurred the day after her mother's birthday in her past life, an incident where Prince Lutz killed someone within the palace walls. The next day, Hinael dressed plainly and approached a soldier, accusing him of stealing something valuable from Prince Lutz. The soldier denied the accusation, claiming ignorance of the item. Hinael described the almoner, embroidered with the image of a goddess and inlaid amethysts as her eyes. She convinced the soldier to hand over the almoner, assuring him she wouldn't reveal his involvement. Relieved, she examined the almoner, finding it even more exquisite than she remembered. It was said that Prince Lutz cherished this item, rarely letting it out of his sight, as it belonged to his late mother. She planned to use it to secure his proposal. Suddenly, a sword was pointed at her neck. A man's voice remarked that he intended to kill the thief, but was curious why a princess would protect a criminal. Hinael turned to see Prince Lutz. She asked how he had entered her room. Upon seeing the almoner, the prince's demeanor changed. He rushed to Hinael, taking the almoner and stopping the spell emanating from it. He remarked that it was fortunate he found it before anyone was harmed. Hinael, fearing for her life, begged for a chance to explain. The prince sarcastically asked if the thief was her secret lover. Hinael denied it, explaining she feared that killing the thief over a misunderstanding might lead to further conflict between their realms. Prince Lutz responded with irony, recalling the bloodshed of Sal's soldiers during the invasion attempt. He then took a seat, recounting the clear memory of the battle. Hinael acknowledged their need to atone for the reckless bloodshed and mentioned her father's promise to offer one of Sal's princesses as a gesture of reconciliation. Prince Lutz guessed she was one of the 5 princesses, and she asked which one he would choose. She remembered that in her previous life he had chosen randomly and had no real interest in women beyond duty, gathered her courage, and requested that he choose her. Surprised, the prince found her request intriguing. Lighting a candle to get a clearer look at her, he smirked at the sight of Hinael in her negligee. He commented on the unusual nature of a marriage proposal from a woman on her knees in such attire. Embarrassed, Hinael tried to cover herself. The prince remarked that if she truly wanted to be his wife, she would need to do better to win his favor. Hinael realized this was her chance and that she must do whatever it took to change her fate. Determined, she stood up and declared, "If leaving myself exposed is what you desire, I'm more than willing to oblige." Lutz was taken aback as she quickly undressed. She then asked, "Would this be more to your highness's liking?" Surprised by her boldness, he remarked, "You seem to have a knack for catching one's interest." He threw his coat to her, instructing her to cover up before he grew bored, adding that he hadn't traveled such a long way to see a naked woman. Seated, Lutz asked for her reasons for wanting to marry him and going to such lengths. Hinael explained her predicament with Chetaire, who intended to propose to her, and her father's likely approval. However, this was not what she wanted. She had no choice unless the imperial Prince of Triekas claimed her as his bride first. Lutz approached her, reminding her of the rumors about him, trying to scare her off. Hinael replied that those rumors didn't matter to her, but requested one promise from the prince, that she would be the one to bear his child. She needed no affection, only his word that he would protect their child as his rightful successor. As Lutz pondered her request, a servant knocked on the door, asking to shut the windows. Their conversation was abruptly cut short, and Lutz jumped off the balcony, leaving her. The next day, Hinael dressed elaborately, surprising her servant, who assumed she was preparing to meet Chetaire. Hinael clarified that she was not, her mind preoccupied with concerns about meeting Prince Lutz, wondering if he would accept her proposal and if her attire was suitable. Lost in thought, she accidentally bumped into several concubines. She bowed politely, but they mocked her, laughing at her identity as the daughter of a maid. Just then, a man, an aide to Prince Lutz, interrupted and announced that the prince was expecting his guest. Hinael followed him, leaving the concubines surprised and jealous. Meanwhile, in the West Palace, Lutz awaited Hinael. She greeted him and returned his robe. He stopped her from introducing herself, expressing no interest in knowing her name. Regarding her proposal, he stated that he would take her as his wife if she agreed to his terms. Prince Lutz continued, "Before we get to the terms, there's something I'd like to know. Chetaire Phil, the man they call your betrothed." Hinael was taken aback by what people were saying about their relationship, but the prince pressed on. "He's earned quite the reputation as the love-struck count. If it is simply the title of princess consort you're after, I can tell you now, you're making a mistake. Frankly, you'd be better off as a countess by his side than as my wife." With determination, Hinael replied, "A life of marital bliss is not what I am after. And the reason for that, I can't share with you, your highness. Even if I were to explain, you would not understand. All I desire is to serve you as your wife." Lutz then laid out his terms. "I will sire an heir purely out of obligation. But beyond that, there will be no such thing as shared conversations, no needless intimacy. You will ask for nothing else of me. And even if you bear my heir, the child will never hold true power." Hinael, filled with resolution, answered happily, "Yes, your highness. I would be honored." Lutz informed her that he would make a formal proposal the next day, to which she expressed deep gratitude. Returning to her servant, Hinael did not reveal the details of her conversation with Prince Lutz. She contemplated the future, knowing she couldn't bear the thought of taking her servant to a distant foreign land filled with hardships. Grabbing her servant's hands, she reassured her that she was just nervous about the prospect of marriage. Her servant comforted her and promised to make her the most beautiful person in the entire kingdom in preparation for the proposal the next day. The following day, Hinael's mother sent her some accessories, gifts from His Majesty. Hinael recognized them as the only gifts her mother had received from the king, understanding that her mother wanted her to look her finest. In the palace, Hinael bumped into Selah, the king's true-born daughter. Greeting them politely, she was met with mockery about her worries that Chetaire might not propose to her. A man from behind complimented her beauty. Turning around, she saw it was Chetaire Phil, who was staring at her chest. Noticing a scratch on her hand, he pulled her over, concerned. Hinael assured him she was fine and wondered why he was so upset. As Chetaire leaned in to kiss her hand, Hinael pulled away in disgust. Chetaire, confused and hurt, asked what he had done to upset her. Their attention was then caught by a voice. Prince Lutz. He walked over and claimed he had been searching all over for Hinael, leaving Chetaire seething with anger. Prince Lutz gently grabbed Hinael's hand, asking if the scratch was his doing. He kissed her hand and apologized if he had caused her any harm. Chetaire was furious and forcefully grabbed Hinael's hand, starting to lecture Prince Lutz on the manners in Sal, stating that kissing the hand of a mere acquaintance was deemed improper. Lutz, unfazed, took a step forward and grabbed Chetaire's wrist, reminding him of who had invaded another's territory, unannounced, yet dared to lecture on manners. He asked Chetaire, "Am I to take this as a sign that your kingdom has no interest in making peace with Triekas?" At that moment, the king and queen entered the room, sensing the tension between Prince Lutz and Count Phil. Lutz addressed the king, saying, "I was told that I would be offered a princess of Sal at tonight's gathering. Let us settle the matter now." Chetaire immediately interjected, "Your Majesty, may I remind you that we have already spoken on this matter. I wish to take Princess Hinael as my bride." Lutz firmly announced that his mind was already set on Hinael. The king, taken aback by the fact that both men wanted the same princess, suggested that Prince Lutz meet his other 4 daughters before making a decision. Lutz then brought up the matter of Count Phil, owing him an apology for mocking him. The king commanded Chetaire to apologize to Prince Lutz at once. However, Lutz turned to Princess Hinael and said that she was the only one who might bring him joy that evening, and perhaps then he could overlook the impudence of the lowly count. Seeing the tension, Hinael's mother begged the king to spare her daughter. Noticing her worry, Lutz assured her that Princess Hinael had helped him retrieve something important and had earned his gratitude. He promised that Hinael would be well protected and cared for in Triekas. Hinael found his words surprisingly kind and thought this would at least make it easier for her mother to bear than seeing her dragged off against her will. The king reminded Hinael to remember that she was going to Triekas for the sake of peace between the 2 nations. Prince Lutz admitted that he felt a hint of remorse for claiming a princess who was already spoken for and suggested they could ease the matters by finding a worthy match for Count Phil here and now. The king agreed with the idea and asked Chetaire to choose from the remaining 4 princesses as his bride. However, Chetaire insisted that he only wanted Princess Hinael. Prince Lutz, undeterred, pressed him to choose one of the other princesses. Reluctantly, Chetaire had no choice but to comply. He surveyed the princesses and finally made his selection. Hinael was left in shock. As Chetaire chose me, who had been Prince Lutz's wife in Hinael's previous life, Hinael couldn't help but feel a sense of surrealism. In this life, she was to marry Lutz, and me would be wed to Chetaire. Fate had indeed upended itself. Noticing her worry, Prince Lutz took her outside and asked what was wrong. She expressed relief that she didn't have to marry Chetaire, and gratitude for Lutz's generosity. Feeling the summer heat, Prince Lutz lay on a bench to rest. Hinael, surprised by his casual demeanor, pondered if this might be her last summer. Seeing a pregnant woman walking alongside her husband, she thought of her own child, and tears began to stream down her face. Prince Lutz asked why she was crying, and she replied that she was thinking of her mother. She explained that her mother had entered the palace as a maid and was made a concubine after Hinael's birth, but never earned His Majesty's favor. Hinael worried that her life in the palace without her mother would only grow more difficult. Realizing why she was called a half-born princess, Prince Lutz comforted her, saying he disliked everything about this land, from the weather to its customs, and suggested she spend more time with her mother because he had no intention of returning once he left. Offering his hand, he asked if Sala had no custom of escorting a lady. Hinael, understanding, took his hand. He then told her not to cry later when they returned, so that his efforts of playing the part of an enamored suitor wouldn't go in vain, which would also ease her mother's worries. Hinael thanked him happily, causing him to blush. They then parted ways, and Hinael returned to the ballroom. Me greeted her and congratulated her on her engagement. Me also apologized for marrying Chetaire, but Hinael assured her that she wasn't upset at all and that there was nothing to be sorry for. Given the unexpected engagement, Hinael checked in with me to see if she was okay. Me revealed that she had longed to marry someone like Chetaire since she was a child. Hinael's only concern was whether me would end up with the same tragic fate as in her previous life. Chetaire approached Hinael and requested a private word with her.